Hello!
Hello, my friend.
I thought I haven't seen you in like a long time.
It has been a while. You look gorgeous. I'm loving this color scheme. It's working very well.
It's look, it's look right, like the skin tone and everything, and the I tried. I
Well,
tried.
it's working. It is
It's
working.
working. That's good to know. I appreciate that. But thank you. I want to start by saying thank you so much for accepting my random request to talk about this. It was a
Always.
very it was a very random idea. It came out like just came out of nowhere. Like I have wanted to talk a long time about how much I dislike Suicide Prevention Month. Um, and I finally kind of had the courage to reach out to a couple of people. And one of the first people that came to mind was you. I love your work. I love how you talk about mental health and suicide. We have very similar values. So I was like, let me reach out and what can we talk about? There's so many things, but we decided that we should talk about specifically anti-stigma campaigns and basically where they're falling short, where they're failing. And as some people know, this series is called Sick to Death, Sick to Death of Suicide Prevention
I love
Month.
it. That
So
was a
a shout
piece
out
of
to
mad
Jack.
genius.
Yeah, it's a shout out to Jack Patrici, a friend of mine who I was like, what is a good title for this? And she was like, Sick to Death. So great. Thank you very much. So I don't know, should we start with introductions? Like my name is Isabel Garcia. I am starting to use my full name now as a way to reclaim my identity because assimilation kind of took that away from me. This whole idea that I have quote unquote a long name. It's not a long name in my culture, it's just my name. So my full name is Isabel Cristina Garcia Peralta. Like that's my name, right? I use she, her pronouns, and I am the founder of Estoy Aquí, which means I am here. And yeah, basically what I do is talk about suicide from a social justice lens. Like I do training workshops, speaking engagements and stuff like that, all about that connection. So yeah, I want to give you the chance to introduce yourself too.
Thank you for that. Also, I'm just loving the reclamation. Like, if your name took the whole space of this Instagram live, like, let's say it. Um, I am Stephanie Lynn Kaufman Tumkulu. I use they and she pronouns. Um, I'm the founder and director of Project Let's, and I feel like I've been doing this my whole life. I know it's been a long time, right? Um, and I entered this space as a psychiatric survivor, as somebody who was labeled with mental illness very young, um, and had no other framing, no other language, a connection point to what you were just sharing about your name through my own family history of assimilation as well, particularly into whiteness, really losing contact with all of our culturally rooted practices,
Yeah.
knowledge, rituals that hold a container for suicide and mental health outside of clinical language. So that is a big part of my own personal work and healing journey has been actually here are all these ways that we can perceive our experiences, which one fits best at the moment in time that we're at and allows us to get our needs met as best as possible. So that's me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Yeah.
I'm like, this could be a 20-hour Instagram live because we have all the things to say. But yes, thank you for the invitation, Isabel. It's always a pleasure.
That is exactly what I was thinking. I was like, oh my God, there is so much to talk about. But But we know, we kind of know where maybe where we're going, right? Like we're, because there is one specific piece, and we can just get right into it about this idea of anti-stigma. And I see it across social media everywhere, not just on Suicide Prevention Month, but on Suicide Prevention Month, I feel it gets like more intensified. Like I feel, oh my God, like it's everywhere and I cannot escape it. Like it just overwhelms me. So I'm wondering, the main question is, what about it? What about it we feel is lacking there? Like there's something missing in these campaigns or messaging, whatever we want to call it. What is missing? And in talking about what are the other alternatives, there are other things that we can talk about, and why aren't we talking about it? Like, right? So I don't know, I just wanted to put the question out there. Feel free to start, and also the people who are watching, feel free also to answer the question, like what are the things that when you look at anti-stigma campaigns, you're like, something's missing here, or it doesn't feel right.
Thank you for the question. I think I want to start by saying I think that because stigma is the language that so many people have been exposed to, that feels like an accessible entry point for a lot of people. That feels like the language where, okay, we might know what we're talking about with regards to mental health. And even for Project Let's, way back in 2013, when I was coming up with a name, stood for Let's Erase the Stigma. And that was really where I was rooted as well, in this kind of awareness, this place of raising awareness, right? And, fast forward years later, we have changed our name to Let's End the Saneism. And I'm just really grateful that the letters all aligned. No, but, I think the point being that for so many of us, there's a real purpose why we don't have other language that's intentional. And when I'm starting to kind of put language to what's missing with mental health stigma, I look at other marginalized communities and I'm like, ooh, where is this language of stigma, right? It's not to pit marginalized communities against each other. My point is to say that when we don't look further underneath, like, where does the stigma come from, right? What is it actually doing? What's underneath it? What are the tangible impacts of it, right? And we don't push to name this as a system of oppression that's actually impacting our community members, then we're missing this very critical connector, this bridge towards solidarity. And I actually think of stigma as like the mental health equivalent of it's all in your head, right? Because it's basically telling you that it's all in your head. Your fear is about, it's not real fear. It's just stigma. You're afraid of what people are going to think of you, right? And I remember having that fear very young. And then I remember it like being, this much of my fear in the grand scheme of things. It very quickly became the fear of what people are going to do to me, not what people are going to think about me. Though, of course, those things are interconnected, right? But I think with stigma, we maintain ourselves in this nebulous cloud of, you need to work through your fear of the mental health system and come to terms with it. And we don't, and actually, when we look at like research and just narratives of our community members, the last like decade, this explosion of like mainstream conversations around mental health, mental illness, stigma, it's actually not doing what we think it is. Like when we look at folks in like psychotic communities, folks who navigate altered states, actually like the stigma is worse now than it was before, right? Because we're putting these communities like, we're giving maybe more visibility to certain communities without the protections and the frameworks of understanding. So it's a lot of exposure without tangible support, and that feels like bullshit. So yeah, I'm always struck by this like wow, it just feels like such a psychology thing to do, to say that stigma is the crux of this whole thing because it's intangible. It lives in the head. We can kind of force someone to negotiate their reality, right? Oh, it's not real, it's you. So yeah, that's kind of where I start around where is the stigma coming from? What's underneath it? What's at the root? What does it do? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I relate to a lot of what you said. There is this individualism to it, to this idea of stigma. And as you were talking about, like, where does it come from, what is, right, like this focus on what it is and how to get rid of it or whatever, I keep thinking about culture, specifically my culture, and how one of the messages that I get the most from these campaigns is stigma is your fault because your culture doesn't talk about it. Your people don't talk about mental health. Therefore, this is your fault. And your culture, it's almost like I feel like these campaigns are saying that my culture is like broken or wrong or something. And like they generalize it, like, because people of color don't talk about mental health. First of all, I don't know where that comes. Like, I'm not sure where this belief that Black and brown people in general don't talk about mental health, I don't know where it's coming from, but it doesn't fit my worldview. I actually do believe that we do talk about it. We just don't use, or may not use, pathologizing, like the pathology model. Like, we might not call something depression or anxiety disorder, but that doesn't mean that we are not talking about mental health.
Yeah.
Like, there seems to be a push about you have to use certain words. Like, if you're talking about mental health, you have to use certain words. And if you don't use the words, then you're not talking about mental health and you're not taking care of your mental health. And it translates to me to this shaming of, well, you don't care about it. Therefore, what are you doing? Like, your culture, what is it doing? They're doing it wrong, type of thing. And that's basically how I feel about literally every anti-stigma campaign I have seen. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it, because you don't.
Yeah.
And that's bad. Well, the thing is, we do, and also we do have our own supports. I talk a lot about the hair salon, in the barber shops, and the libraries, and the la curandera, the herbalist. We do have, and I'm speaking more in the Latinx, the Latina community, my worldview, that we do utilize supports. It's just that it's not considered mental health support by the system because they don't have a clinical social work degree. They don't have a license. But that doesn't mean that they are not part of that mental health support community care that we do as a culture. So I just feel like it erases a lot of the strengths that different cultures have. It's like very deficit based, and it makes me feel like crap. Which is the right. It's supposed to be the opposite. It's supposed to, like, but it makes me feel like shit. Honestly, I don't know.
It just reminds me when you're talking about this kind of turning back the blame against your own culture, and I think that it's something that it sows seeds of division within family units as well, and like community units. I'm just thinking about my own experience of like when I came into this like understanding of some of my experiences, maybe more so, like maybe I'm thinking about like 15, 16 years old now. There was definitely this moment where I looked at my parents and I was like, wow, like I have this language now to like, you know, talk about my experiences, and like, why aren't the two of you addressing like your shit pool of trauma, like,
All right.
what is this? Like, I'm in therapy, like, you address it. And, there was this moment of like feeling like I was doing, this work that they weren't doing. And it, took years and years, right, to come into this place of understanding that, first of all, it's a gift, and a privilege to have the choice of language, and to see that there are ways in which, the way that I kind of think about it is that it's less about like, oh, your culture and your people don't talk about it. It is that this is when we look at one of the main tools of colonialism, one of the main purposes of colonialism was to cut off indigenous people, Black people, and therefore everyone, every person of the global majority, and every person who has been since labeled as or perceived as white, who before that came from a distinct ethnic group. The purpose, a tool, was to criminalize, erase, not just people, but culture. And within culture, healing practices, knowledge around how we heal people. And I see one of my friends here, Dunsani, who is from Swaziland, Eswatini. And we've done this like cross-cultural partnership together, from, me being from so-called US. And I think a lot about how this language of stigma, global health, undermines like local solutions, local knowledge. It's so much bigger because it takes away funding opportunities from people who are on the ground in their communities, who know the language, the words, all of the moving pieces that are necessary to understand how to support someone in a specific environmental context. When we look at liberation psychology, when we look at Ignacio Martin Baró, who talks so much about how in his development of liberation psychology, it could not ever be removed from politically, socially, and economically what was happening in his home. And I think about where is this nuance and the space for the specificity. And also you said it so well, like people are talking about this, they just maybe aren't using the pathology model. And thinking about, for a lot of people, this idea of like the primary form of mental health care being like going into this little office and talking to someone about all the things that like make you sad, and then like as you're like really getting into it and you're like maybe about to process something really big, the therapist is like, actually it's time to wrap up today, so we're gonna have to close down. I see that you're making big progress, but I'm gonna need you to like wrap those tears back up, honey, and save it for next week. And I think about how even that is so far removed from what a healer is supposed to be and do and be accessible to people. And so the whole approach to mental health, it's not just the language, it's the entire approach that feels foreign, right? You're going to have white people going into other people's countries and telling them, no, don't help people this way. This is the right way to help people. Here's the church, here's God, here's this, here's the mental health system, here's pills, here's medicine. And you take that away and then you say, oh, like, and then, people are too spiritual. They're praying, they're going to church, they're in their religions, and they're not using medicine, they're not using the mental health system. So there's always something that people of the global majority are doing wrong, that they're not doing correctly when it comes to addressing mental health. But no one's ever looking at the mental health system and being like, maybe it was really wrong that we're just lobotomizing people. We're just like, I don't know, we're just sticking ice picks in people's brains and seeing what the hell happens, right? So, there's this way that we're always this ethnocentric culture of dismissing everyone else's ways of knowing, thinking, being. Maybe have we considered that some cultures don't have specific words to designate things relating to mental health and mental illness because they have a much more integrated and holistic worldview, whereas some indigenous languages, right, they don't focus on nouns being the primary form of words. It's verbal, right? There's verbs. We relate to people in a different way, so maybe we're not going to talk about it in the same way, but it's there.
Exactly.
And that's the baseline that everyone has built off of, no matter how far you strayed from it. We all come from cultures that have much more embodied ways of understanding what it means to experience mental distress, spiritual crises, trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And we've come to this place where now, if you do not agree with the way that somebody dictates who you are and what you think, then you are non-compliant, you are treatment resistant. If your body mind doesn't work with the pills and the therapy, there's something wrong with you. So we keep seeing this theme, right? So it's so much more than just the language of stigma. It's how it penetrates everything. I would argue that stigma, if we're going to call it that, has been largely perpetuated, if not created and sustained, through the psychiatric and medical industrial complexes. And then you have practitioners who are going to blame individuals for not engaging with services rightfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that is one of the biggest things for me when looking at this whole anti-stigma thing, because it seems like when I look at social media, whatever, the media in general, it seems like it's always focused on like us, people outside the system. Like, we have to work on it. We have to dismantle it. We have to talk about it. What about, though, just putting out there, what about the people who are working inside the system? Because the reason I don't go to therapy, first of all, I don't go to
talk
therapy.
About it.
I don't go to therapy. Why? Because I don't want to be put in a cage for saying that I want to die. Like, why would I do that? Like, why would I put myself in danger of being incarcerated? Like, no, I'm not going to do that. I am not going to do that. So, and it's funny because my mom is like, you are the weirdest mental health advocate because you don't go to therapy.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, you're so weird. Like my mom, you're so weird. And I'm like, so you want me to like remember all of the things I went through, like solitary confinement, physical restraints, cops in my home, because I said that I wanted to die, and that's it. No questions asked. Just that's it. Are you suicidal? I mean, I guess. I don't know. I don't even know what people mean when they say suicidal, to be honest. There's so many meanings to that. Like, right. What does that even mean? So, you're a danger to yourself. Therefore, you need to, we're going to call 911 without your consent, right? That has been my experience all the time with the mental health and psychiatric system. So why would I, quote unquote, reach out? I don't. But there seems to be, with anti-stigma campaigns, there seems to be this, like you were saying, there's no acknowledgement of the violence and like the iniquities going on in the system. It's almost like the mental health psychiatric system are in this hierarchy, and they're at the top, and therapists and psychiatrists are like perfect. Like, they will reach out, they will save you type of thing. Like, that's what I get from the messages. But when I look at that doesn't fit my experience. And I know it doesn't fit the experience of many other people. So that has always annoyed me. Just the lack of acknowledgement of the violence and harm that come from the so-called help. I mean, I will say that, and I think I wrote this on Twitter once. I was like, the so-called professionals were so focused on keeping my body, like my physical form, alive, that they were killing other parts of me. They killed the spiritual, the emotional, the psychological. I mean, I definitely didn't, quote unquote, get better, quote unquote, whatever that means. So I don't know. I wish there was more acknowledgement of the system piece and how it works. More transparency.
Yeah.
More transparency about that. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Everyone deserves to know what they potentially might be getting themselves into. And for myself, I think there have been times in my life where certain clinical interventions were useful, and that has been times where I was extreme, like a therapeutic setting. Um, I was extremely isolated, and I had nobody in my life at that point in time where I felt like I could actually like unfiltered share myself. And that was a space for a period of time where I was able to access that. But I always like had this thought in my head that like if there was a person in my life who I could have there was nothing that felt clinical about it. There was nothing that felt like something that another person couldn't give me outside the context of the system, right? If that makes sense.
Mhm.
And then there have even been times where I've known, okay, like I've been put on like every single like antidepressant and psych med under the sun. I've tried them all.
Me too.
And at the end of the day, the one thing that I do like to have access to is a benzodiazepine, particularly like an Ativan. If I'm having like a major panic attack meltdown, that is like knowing I have that. I don't take it regularly because I've also had negative body mind consequences from the psych meds, but I've had these moments where I'm like, I am like about to be in a really bad place. Okay. Like I'm at like a 7. It's about to be a 10, maybe in like 3 days, maybe a week. It's coming. And then I start picking up the phone. I'm like, okay, I need to get my meds. I don't have any more. I need to have my backup of meds, right? You pick up the phone, you're trying to get help. Okay. 10 psychiatrists you call aren't seeing patients until 2039. The other ones don't call you back. You are begging for care, you can't get it. And so that's been like the crux of this whole thing as well for me, is like when you do not want psychiatric intervention, it's right there to swoop you up in whatever form it can find you in. If you're in school, if you just gave birth, if you're telling someone you want to die, if you're in a therapist's office, if you're roaming around the streets talking about something that people think like you shouldn't be talking about and they don't understand, psychiatry, here to swoop you. If you, on the other side, are like, I want help, I want this kind of medication, this thing has helped me in the past, this is what I'm looking for, you might be called a drug seeker. There's no help, you can't find it, you're dismissed. So many of us, like the main lesson of psychiatry has been knowing how to lie, figuring out how to sever yourself from your body, so that you can perform a certain set of emotions that doesn't get you incarcerated, and your entire life becomes walking on eggshells, being like, do I like suffer in silence so that I can preserve the peace of the other people around me? Or do I live in my mad and neurodivergent truth and maybe cause disruption and cause chaos? Because the other side of this is that there's a lot of people who self-label as mental health advocates, in a whole range of things, who or people in general who claim to like in the mind ideologically be like, yes, people, there are mentally ill people and it impacts how they behave. There are neurodivergent people and it impacts how they think and how they move through the world. But then when there is that neurodivergent person moving through the world in a neurodivergent way, people are like, what is that? We thought this was like theoretical. Like we didn't mean they were actually gonna like do things that informed us that they were crazy, right? So it's like this constant battle of, do I want help? Do I want safety? Do I want housing? Do I want a job? Do I want freedom of movement? Do I want to be in a space where I can have access to my phone? Like, and if I do, then like I might not be able to be wholly truthful about my experiences. And again, like this other piece for me that keeps coming back is like, sometimes we can't find an answer for something, right? There has been this like overwhelming feeling in my body mind since I'm very young that the pain that I feel and the suffering that I feel is that solely mine. That like my body as a vessel carries the legacy of impact of my ancestors that got me to this point, right? And so when I'm in a therapeutic space and the whole thing is like figuring out what happened to me, right? Like, where's the trauma? If you can't verbalize it, let's find it. Let's dig. What happened when you were a kid? What happened here? What did your mom do to you? What did your mom not do to you? And for me, I was always like, I feel like I'm coming into this space with this like surrounding of my ancestral lineage being like, we are in pain, and stigma does not grasp. Stigma can never grasp that. And it doesn't touch why people feel like it was not stigma for me that kept me out of the mental health system. It was a complete lack of a willingness to view me and my experiences in a way that had humanity, dignity, a sense of something that felt like I could really take it and move forward in my life and not feel shame about myself. I learned stigma from the mental health system. I learned
exactly
right? I learned how to hate myself from the mental health system, from someone looking at me and saying, oh, actually, I don't think that you can do these things that you want to do because I'm going to diagnose you with something. And I think about Eduardo Duran, who I talk about all the time everywhere, Indigenous healer, writer, who wrote Healing the Soul Wound. And he talks about diagnosis as a naming ceremony, a non-consensual naming ceremony where you are given a name. And in many cultures, we know the importance of a name and what it means. And often meaning, you know, in Jewish culture, there's this belief that your name is like it follows your path in the world. It's deeply interconnected with your path in the world. And so just again, this idea that we don't even hold space for like what it means to be given a label that deeply impacts how you think about yourself and how other people relate to you. That's not imaginary. That's real. Someone puts a word on top of me and now it changes my relationship. So how is that all in a nebulous cloud? Like, that's real. That's tangible.
Yeah. That's diagnosis is so, oh God. Because I remember I was diagnosed when I was 13. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, right? And I remember at the time I felt, oh my God, I'm not the only one. Yay!
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I felt so relieved. I was like, oh my God, I have a name for it. We can solve it now, right? We're gonna solve this.
Good. Yeah.
We're gonna fix it. There's a name. And they started with a chemical imbalance and all these explanations. And I was like, okay, cool. I just have to increase serotonin or whatever the hell they told me. Right? I remember my parents were excited. Oh my God, we got this. We got the.
We did it.
We got the answer. We got the answer. And that's when I realized, oh no, like it's when that was back in the Dominican Republic. I moved to the US at 15. And that's where I realized how diagnoses are used as a tool for violence and to take away your rights. So I was like, oh, wait a second. I thought it was going to be helpful. But for me and specifically, it wasn't 100% helpful to have that label, as you said. And I also realized when looking at anti-stigma campaigns, the diagnosis is almost like a labor for how much are you gonna give back to capitalism? It's almost like a measure. We're gonna measure how dysfunctional you are, like depending on the label, you know, like borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia or whatever. We are gonna measure how dysfunctional you are, and we are gonna measure how unproductive you're gonna be, like how useless you're gonna be for capitalism. Because the higher the more useless you are, the more pills or whatever we are gonna try to give you, because we need you to keep working. Like we need you to keep producing, to keep your internalized oppression going as well. And that is something that, that I have noticed in different campaigns, the focus on capitalism, like you need to keep going type of thing. Break the stigma because you need to keep going. Forget about the white supremacy culture, root causes, colonialism, whatever. You have to keep going, right? You're here to work. You're here to produce. You're here to go to school. Like the entire, like when I came to this country and I received quote unquote treatment, the main question was, when are you going to go back to school? Like that was the main thing. Like, are you going to go back to school? Because I dropped out of high school, right? So the main, it was always going back to, so where are you going to go back to school? And so I don't know, there's always that piece that comes up for me that really annoys me.
Yeah.
And I want to take this chance to read the comments because there are a lot of great comments in here. Like one comment says, most of these campaigns are missing the sense of reality of life. Most of the messages are rooted in the ideal campaign, which is more often than not, they don't have connection with real life, right? Real life issues. Yes, stigma puts the onus on the person and not on the sanest society. The profiling of some populations and members of society actually aggravates the stigma in most cases than it being an intervention towards curbing the discrimination of the certain groups. Stigma can be a gaslighting, a threat, and a violence all at the same time. Mental health interventions should be contextualized to be in sync with culture and orthodox way of living for the target population. You have to be able to lie to the face of oppression to stay as safe as possible often.
Yes.
For a sensible integration of mental health, we need to be honest about appreciating the psychosocial support that exists in all communities in different ways. And there is no one size fits all approach. From a young age, I was taught to lie to avoid being locked up. Exactly. I find it hard that so many leftists identify with psychiatric disorders without fully realizing or acknowledging that they are racist and have false conceptions of people. That's very interesting. One of the things that I know, and there are people that do talk about it. I'm not gonna say I wish people would talk about it more. No, there are definitely people talking about it. We talk about it. Like the isms of this whole diagnosis, racism, ableism, all the different things that this language is rooted. Like if we look at the root of these different languages and labels and diagnoses, whatever we want to call it, if we look at it, oftentimes it comes from some form of racism or ableism, isms, right? But with these campaigns, there are certain things that are promoted as the right way and the only way. So like it makes me feel like I don't have options. Like there's only one way of talking about it and one type of support. And that if I don't talk about it that way, and if I don't get that type of support, then I don't care about my mental health.
Well, yes. Yes. And I'm also just like, I'm kind of like having this thought in this way for the first time. So if it comes out a little jangled, like I apologize. But the person who just commented about, identifying with psychiatric disorders, I have personally felt and found myself in a lot of tension at times with folks within, and I'll kind of make this separation for the point of this, of within like disabled communities and like mad communities, like folks who are in like disability justice, who've entered maybe more through or more of an orientation towards physical impairment outside of like a mad liberation sense. Because there's this thing for me, and the way it's coming out that I want to say it is like, for example, with borderline personality disorder, which I was diagnosed with when I was younger. My personal beliefs personally are that a personality cannot be disordered. If somebody would like to join this live and explain to me what an ordered personality looks like, then I would be willing to have the conversation. If nobody can tell me what an ordered personality looks like, then I struggle to understand what a disordered personality is. And further, when we look at okay, so there's lots of different ways that the diagnosis of BPD gets weaponized against communities. Okay, so if we know all of that, and then we're still left with somebody saying, well, my borderline personality disorder diagnosis helps me. It really helps me. It benefits me. And I feel like this is, again, just a replication of our individualist culture, right? Like our individualist, I find value in this diagnosis, so I'm going to prioritize that over the fact that for many, many, many other people, it is a tool of harm. It is a tool that is used to criminalize, to cage, to confine, to coerce, to kill, to strip of opportunities, to strip of human rights. And if my personal, the epiphanies and the support that I have gained from my access to a diagnosis, my solidarity-minded perspective is that is not more important than the collective. And the collective needs these diagnoses to not exist in this way anymore. Because for the collective, it is undermining our collective capacity to live and be free. And I really believe that we can access the same comfort and relief that we get through a diagnosis in different ways. Like, for example, I have been working on a project that hopefully is done within, I don't know, the next 15 years. It's a really long thing. Just of like an entire reframe of the DSM that looks at a wholly new way of conceiving what are our experiences. Because for me, like now where I'm at in my life, I don't care if something is like, oh, this tool is only for someone with like post-traumatic stress disorder. This tool is for someone who's bipolar. If the tool is there and I find it and it helps me, I don't really care if I match the label that, right? Like that is, and I know people are like, oh no, that's only like, I don't have ADHD, so I can't use this tool. And I'm like, what? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you don't have to be labeled with a diagnosis to start adapting your life in such a way. Like my daughter, I perceive a lot of neurodivergence in her. I am not going to wait until a moment where it becomes, it starts impacting her life in a negative way to address that, right? When I started introducing things when she was younger, I saw she was wanting to break things all the time, open things, get inside of things. And I was like, oh, she's destroying books. She's destroying everything in my house. Oh my God, what am I doing? I was like, let me just see. I started getting her all sorts of sensory things, slime and all these things for her hands. And there's a way that people might be like, oh, like those are for autistic kids, or right? Like those are for kids with like sensory, like, I don't know. She's 4 years old. She's still like becoming herself. But I do know that when I gave her slime and sensory toys, it made a huge difference. So there's a way for me in which that's like the balance. And then we get to a point where it's like, okay, we have to navigate the real world. And sometimes the real world requires that maybe we attach this label to ourselves to get a need met. And then I say, do that. And where is the line between like you can have that label and you can be like, fuck that label, but I have that label, I'm gonna use it so I can get accommodation, so I can finish school, or so that I could do X or whatever. So that's kind of my approach. I'm like, pick your pieces, pick whatever piece works and feels best for you. And I feel like there is a very, very, very critical point to, we cannot allow our personal relationship with our diagnoses to become more important than the big picture goal, which is that these diagnoses were not created to help us. They were not created with our best intentions in mind. They were created, as somebody said here, with racist, violent intentions, with ableist and sanist intentions, with capitalist intent. I mean, the DSM literally has the word work in it over 300 times.
Exactly.
The lived experience educator pointed out, which I was like, thank you for naming this so clearly. I mean, it's so true. Someone says the power threat meaning framework is a bit like a new DSM, not perfect, but a different approach, maybe worth seeing. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot. And also with that, I'll say that there are still very good and real critiques from folks who are making the point around, okay, like if we introduce a framework like power, threat, meaning, still, what are we doing, right? Because we're still inside of a mental health system. Maybe we're changing some of the language, but are we structurally changing things beyond that? So that kind of project has to be done in partnership with all of these like larger structural changes as well, I believe. But yeah, I think that there is like a way in which folks have been unwilling to touch the diagnosis thing because it reads as you're undermining somebody's somebody's lived experience. And we've seen this with meds as well. Psych, oh, don't say that you've had a really bad experience with psych meds because other people have good experiences. And I'm like, that's great. But my entire nervous system became dysregulated from it. To this day, my hands are dripping sweat to you right now because my nervous system never figured it out after like many years on these meds. And the last thing I'll say is back to this culture point. It's funny because when I was younger, my parents did not want me to take psych meds. They were very afraid of the side effects. And I was like looking at them like, you backwards people, like modern medicine. And my psychiatrist is drawing little neurotransmitters on a piece of paper and explaining like to my mom, like, this is how it works. And I felt this almost like, I'll say a like sense of like superiority over my parents being like, you are so, how do you not know science and you don't agree? And it's like a decade later, I'm like, wow, yeah, like there is this full circle moment where part of my work now is I'm healing from it. I help, I'm in community with people who are healing from the impacts of psych meds in this way. And I look at my parents and at the time I was like, enemy, like you don't want me to get help. And so these like seeds of division, I think that get sowed in our families, in our communities, because of the language that's imposed on us by a system that none of us like necessarily like agree to. This is just what we've been handed. Right. So yeah, I'll pause.
Yeah, I have a similar experience with my parents, because I was like, wow. I like this value of superiority, or like you were saying, I was like, well, you're stupid or whatever. Like, I know better than you do, blah, blah, blah. And obviously that created family conflict and things like that. And then as I kept doing the work, like learning more about the social justice aspect and all this stuff, I'm like, oh my God, like, wait a second. Yes, we do talk about it. We have different words, approaches, and that's fine. Like, it's not, we're not committing a sin or something like that. And
I don't know if you had this in your family, but a lot of the women on my mother's side of the family, Puerto Rican, is bad nerves. We have bad nerves. Yes. Bad nerves.
Yes.
I heard that.
Nerve attack. Un ataque de nervios, a nerve attack. Or, oh my God, it can be also explained through physical symptoms and not so much this whole I'm sad or whatever. But it can be, oh my God, mi cabeza se está explotando, like my head is exploding.
Yes.
Or something. Yes. Like we have like I can totally think back to my childhood growing up and think about all the different ways that we speak about mental health. But because what I see in the campaigns and when I went to college too, I see, oh, okay, we don't use those words. So I guess the stigma is alive in my family.
Yeah.
And again, the different supports, like we were saying, all these different supports that we do use that are not necessarily promoted as quote unquote professional, because there is an obsession with this thing about professional support and who are the people who are quote unquote qualified. Like there's always this idea of qualify. Another thing that, and I think this is the last thing I will mention is, and I think, I don't know if it's considered controversial or whatever, but there is also this obsession with access,
Mm.
increasing access to therapy. And honestly, my focus is more on how can we live in a world where we don't need to seek these approaches? Like,
I agree.
where we don't have this freaking need of, no, I must have a therapist. It's almost like
Yeah.
therapists are replacing friendships and community. It's almost like people are, I have heard people say, oh, if my partner doesn't see a therapist, I'm not, like, they cannot be my partner. Like, a requirement is that they have to see this so-called qualified, whatever that means, professional support.
Mm.
If they don't, no, like, I cannot love them. And it has become this thing. I don't know if there's a word for it, but it has become this big thing about you must go to therapy. If you don't, again, you are not working on your mental health. You're a bad person, and you are not breaking the stigma.
Mm.
Because, right? That's the whole. You're not talking about it.
Yeah.
You're not accessing the right support. But again, my thing is what it will be like to live in a world where we are not putting, first of all, putting all this pressure on individuals to solve structural issues. How is a therapist gonna solve poverty? I don't know. Because let's be real. How is a therapist gonna solve capitalism? Like, when you go to a session and you're talking, let's say I'm talking about anti-blackness or whatever. Maybe not saying the actual word anti-blackness, but is my experience is referring to that. Sure, I'm not saying that words of whatever or comfort or whatever doesn't work. I'm just saying, are we really dismantling the root of the problem with these so-called professionals, quote unquote, right? Like, I don't know. That is just a random thought that I have, that I just don't. I understand that one of the main goals of all of the work that I'm doing, like when I go into meetings, is always about increasing access. And I'm like, but maybe we should talk about
For what? For what? To what end?
the actual problems and how individuals with licenses they're not gonna be able to really dismantle this whole thing. Like, that's not fair. Also, that's not fair to put these different so-called professionals on a pedestal and expect them to, quote unquote, solve the mental health crisis, right? Like, the big monster of, right, like this big thing. So I don't know. That's my last thought that I'm putting out there.
No, I love it. I increasing access. And I think we see the outcome of that right now. We see so many states increasing access to mental health care. What that means for them is increasing access to involuntary forms of mental health care, right? It is something that, you know, also with this kind of the victim blaming thing that you're talking about, it reminds me of when people would say, in my experience, oh, you know, if you experience sexual violence, it's your responsibility to report that to the police, because if you don't, then that person is just going to be free and walk around and be doing all sorts of things to other people. It's your fault, right? Like, you should have done something. Okay. And then I'm pretty sure, you know, anybody who has tried or attempted to navigate the criminal punishment / criminal legal system in the wake of sexual violence will tell you that, you know, by doing that, you know, we are not protecting the world. We are subjecting ourselves. And with that, I will even name, in college, I was raped in college, and I was looking at potentially going through a Title IX process, which, for folks who don't know, is like a specific, like, non-criminal legal system process that happens on a college campus. And I met with folks about it, and I was literally told to my face by mental health professionals do not go through with this, because if you do like go through with a case against this person,
Yeah.
you will be quote destroyed on the stand. You have a long mental health history, you've taken psychiatric medication. And it was funny because this person who raped me, he actually said in a follow-up interaction that I probably just didn't remember that I consented because I took too much of my psychiatric medication, right? So I share this to say that the same way that I was treated by my rapist, I was treated by the mental health system, right? No one will believe you, right? The weaponization that was there. And so when we think about that victim blaming dynamic, that's always there for me. And when you're talking about the clinical mental health system coming in to replace other things, I think that is exactly the truth. And it's replacing things that should naturally exist in communities. And the best way I can summarize this is that I mentioned I have a 4-year-old. She has a lot of energy. She is a big energy kid. My partner is from Swaziland, where he is from. The way he grew up, the only time he was ever inside was to go to sleep at night. He lived outside. There is play, there is sun, it's a different environment, right? And so here, I'm facing issues with my kid of like, oh my God, she talks a lot. Like, that's overwhelming. That causes stress in my house.
Yeah.
Oh, she's like, she wants to watch her iPad too much, right? All these things. And I'm like, we need to come up with solutions and we need to do these things. When we went to Swaziland as a family for the first time, we stayed for months last year. Just being in a different environment completely changed all these things. My daughter, who walked around with her little iPad all the time, wanting to watch all her shows, she didn't know where it was. She didn't care about it. She didn't ask for it. She was so, her body was engaged with everything around her. And I'm like, every time I take my daughter, she just started like a preschool program. Every time I take her, I'm like, wow, like we are literally paying for in the US what just literally naturally is built into life in my partner's home. And that affects everything. It affects sleep, happiness, stress, energy level. When people have too much energy in their body and they don't get it out, that's when we're all bouncing off each other's walls. So you really, really cannot ever underestimate what even changing one thing will do, right? Just changing one thing in a system and seeing, okay, well, actually, we thought this was the problem, but when we put the kid in a different environment, all these things changed. And it was just, a couple of little shifts and changes. So I think, for so many of us to really critically ask ourselves, what is at the root of what I navigate? What language feels best for me? What actually meets my needs? Do I use this word because it was given to me and I had no say in the matter, or because it was given to me and it really resonates with my experience? And we all deserve to choose and to never be told that ourselves, our cultures, our families are not, quote, doing it right or caring about mental health enough, or contributing or perpetuating the stigma because we do not choose to engage in the clinical mental health system that has a brutal legacy of violating and dehumanizing our communities. So to folks who are getting positive outcomes from the mental health system, I'm always asking them to reflect on what parts of their identities and their social locations could have contributed to that. Because if you have a lot of money and you can pay for private mental health care, I'm sure that place probably looks like a spa, maybe like a spa retreat. I don't know. But there's differences, there's nuance. And so, yeah, we could go forever. I'll pause there. I love you.
We could go forever. And I just wanted to highlight this comment, which I think encapsulates, what we were just talking about. It says, increase access, stop the stigma, mental health matters. All the buzzwords, but never addressing the root causes like colonialism, capitalism, etc. Yes. So the last thing I will say is, I have been saying for a while. So I realized a couple of years ago that when I said I want to die, I wasn't even talking about like me as in the physical form. I meant I want assimilation to die. I want internalized oppression to die. I want people to stop laughing at my accent. Like, those are the things that I wanted to see disappear, not necessarily me. Now, I know that there are people who do truly want to physically die, but I'm just saying that in my perspective, from my worldview, it would have been really helpful to have people around me who could have like helped me see that I didn't even want to die in the first place, like physically die in the first place. It was other things outside of me that I needed, that I still need, that I still want to see like dead, like gone, right? So they are just, overall, there are just so many things, so many complexities, right? So many complexities that are missing from all these campaigns messaging. And I don't know, what would you say, and I don't like the word solution, but what would you say is something that in general that we can do better? Because the word that is coming up to me is, I would love to see more transparency on those campaigns about the system in itself, and being creative, like being creative about these so-called approaches that they are promoting. Like, oh my God, like, how can we really start to hold multiple truths about all this stuff? That's what is going through my head right now.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm just laughing at how like I think a lot of people probably don't even know that like the anti-psychiatry movement was created in partnership and co-led by like psychiatrists, by people who were part of the system. So there is actually also a very long history of people within the system, you know, saying actually like this shit is not correct. And I think that history has been, you know, there are still, you know, folks who call themselves like critical psychologists, psychiatrists who are, but I feel like the miss for me is that these people are very, very rooted in theory. They like to produce papers. And I'm like, that's great. I like to read your paper. I like your theory. I like to sit on my couch with my tea and read your words. And then I go back to my phone where somebody is texting the Project Let's line that we have for folks who are about to like navigating psychiatric incarceration. And I constantly get this message. I might have 5 minutes left. I'm about to be taken. What can you tell me? How can you help me? I'm at the hospital right now, and I think they're going to take my phone, and I'm in this state. Here's the hospital. Can you please call this person? Nobody knows where I am. And I will be talking to someone, and then 5 minutes later, they're gone. And I say, I don't know what just happened to this person. And maybe I hear from them again, and maybe I don't. So every time I read a paper or I see a tweet where a mental health provider feels like they're real fucking radical or doing some really, really important shit, and it's all theory and it's not tangible and it's not tangibly disrupting, putting themselves at risk, changing anything, I say that, you know, it's more of a performance, because as long as I'm still getting those texts, and the people that I'm getting community with and my comrades and my community members, we are all either the person sending the text or on the receiving end of it. I know that not enough is being done. And so that is what my message would be, that we need to really think about the ways that we take our beliefs and our theories and our ideas and our values and start moving them into, through, and out of our bodies, so that people can look at what we do and know our politics and who we are from what we do, and not just what we think, because that is the shift that I want to see. Tangible change.
I love that. That was perfect. Again, yes, we could speak about this for hours. There's a lot, but I think we cover a lot of important points. So I just want to thank you for your time. again, I love talking with you. I love learning from you. So I really appreciate this time. I hope the people who were watching or who are gonna watch also in the future enjoy it. Feel free to like put comments, ask questions. Again, this is very complex. So yeah, thank you so much. And there are gonna be 2 or 3 more episodes. So stay tuned for that. One of them is gonna be about hotlines.
Oh,
Anywho,
I
that
can't
was
wait
gonna
to
be
listen.
controversial. But yes, we're gonna be digging deep into other things that happened during this month that are just like, why? Like, no. Like we have to, we have to talk about it. So
We have to.
um
And if you want to
thank you
hear
so
more
much.
from Isabel, it's going to be on a panel and doing a training with Project Let's. So definitely check that out. I can't wait to continue building and creating with you.
Yes, and before I forget, your page, like the page now is Project That Let's, right?
Yes, we are still Project Let's is locked out. My phone blew up. We are locked out of our Instagram. So I made a project dot let's, a little period in between. That's where we're at for the moment. Hopefully we'll be back soon. So cheers. We love technology. It's a wild ride.
Yay! Alrighty, all right. Thank you so
Thank you.
much, and
Thank you.
y'all. I see you. I don't know, next week or in 2 weeks. I have no clue, honestly. I just know I will go back. So
Much
bye.
love. Bye, y'all.